As the Vor fleet descended upon Earth, there was a silence before the storm, a pause that felt like an eternity. The ground shook with the first volley of orbital strikes, the sound of human civilization crumbling into chaos. New York, London, Tokyo, nothing but ash and rubble in a matter of hours. Humanity, once the undisputed masters of their world, were suddenly as helpless as ants beneath the boot of a conqueror. And yet, in the midst of this devastation, something extraordinary was unfolding. In the deepest, most secure corners of Earth's military complex, Project Warborn was activated. Admiral Elias Voss stood in front of the flickering control panels of a hidden operations center deep beneath the remnants of the Pentagon. He'd never imagined a day would come when the world would burn like this. His hands, once steady at the helm of military strategy, now trembled in the face of something far worse than any opponent he'd ever faced. It wasn't just a war. It was extinction. The Vor Dominion had come, and Earth was their target. "Activate Project Warborn," he ordered, his voice cold and steady despite the chaos above. Behind him, a small group of high-ranking officers scrambled to input the final codes. The fate of the world rested on their shoulders now. Voss had been part of the Warborn project from the very beginning. Decades of preparation, top-secret experiments, and untold resources had gone into crafting the perfect soldiers. Soldiers designed to survive and fight in a war humanity could never hope to win using conventional methods. It was a desperation move, one that would tip the scales, or doom them all. The Warborn had been born from genetic engineering, cybernetic augmentation, and the fusion of cutting-edge AI. They weren't just soldiers. They were weapons, human beings taken to the limit of what a body and mind could endure. The Warborn were not mere survivors. They were warriors, destined to fight back against the annihilation of their race. But as the data streams buzzed to life in front of him, Voss's heart skipped a beat. The Warborn were ready, but so was the enemy. The Vor were no mere invaders. They were a war machine centuries ahead of humanity in their brutality and advanced technology. For all the advantages the Warborn held, they would be facing an adversary that would stop at nothing to wipe them out. Voss turned to his chief strategist, Colonel Sarah Holt, a woman who had seen her share of battles, but never one of this scale. "Do you think they'll even see it coming?" he asked her quietly. Holt met his gaze, her jaw clenched tight. "If we're lucky, we'll make them think they've already won," she said. "But if we're not, if they think we're just insects to crush, then we have nothing to lose." Her words were a harsh reality, but they were also a rallying cry. This was the moment they'd been preparing for. High above Earth, the Vor fleet expanded in size and strength. Hundreds of ships, from massive dreadnoughts to sleek strike cruisers, poured into Earth's orbit. The human resistance had no chance, not without the Warborn. And then, like lightning from the heavens, the Warborn struck. In a concealed military base beneath the ruins of the Rocky Mountains, the first wave of Warborn soldiers were awakened. Their bodies were encased in combat armor, sleek and shimmering with the weight of technology beyond anything the enemy could fathom. Each Warborn was implanted with neural interfaces that connected their minds directly to their weapons, their armor, and one another. They were not just soldiers. They were a collective consciousness, synchronized for battle. They didn't need to talk. Their movements were instinctual, like a dance choreographed in the heart of war. Kara Talon, one of the Warborn's most lethal commanders, was the first to step onto the battlefield. Her neural links pulsed with awareness, her mind instantly mapping the terrain of the shattered cities above. Her muscles rippled beneath her combat armor, her eyes glinting with the cold fire of vengeance. She had been one of the first to volunteer for the Warborn project, her body now a fusion of human resilience and machine precision. She had lost everything, her family, her home, her world, to the Vor. Now, she was the weapon humanity would use to take back what was theirs. Her team followed her onto the surface, leaping from the base into the war-torn world above. They weren't just coming to fight. They were coming to make the Vor regret ever stepping foot on Earth. As Kara's boots hit the scorched earth, She raised her rifle, the sights locking onto a Vor dropship descending through the smoke-filled skies. Without hesitation, she opened fire, her rifle singing the song of destruction. Around her, the Warborn moved with deadly precision, tearing through the Vor's ground forces with brutal efficiency. Each Warborn was more than a soldier. Each was a storm unleashed upon the unsuspecting invaders. In the distance, the Vor's main forces began to regroup, unaware of the nightmare that had just been unleashed upon them. But that was about to change. The Warborn continued their assault across Earth, each battle more intense than the last. It was as if humanity itself had been reawakened, a ferocious, untapped strength coursing through every Warborn soldier. But Cara Talon, though outwardly as unshakable as ever, felt the weight of her leadership pulling at her. Every victory felt hollow without the chance to mourn those who had fallen in the struggle. Every day, the Warborn grew stronger, more precise, and more deadly. But the cost was becoming impossible to ignore. In the midst of the chaos, one thought kept resurfacing in Cara's mind. Are we becoming what we are fighting? This internal conflict gnawed at her as the Warborn's momentum only increased. The Vor were not used to fighting an enemy like them, one that didn't fight in waves, didn't rely on convention. Cara and her team, relentless and unpredictable, turned the tide wherever they struck. But the Vor, though slow to adapt, were far from complacent. Their leadership was fractured, but a new force was emerging. Vor General Rylax, a cold and calculating tactician, had taken control of their war effort and was already formulating a plan to eradicate the Warborn. He was no fool, and he knew that Earth's surface would soon be littered with human corpses if they didn't act quickly. Back on Earth, the Warborn's tactics were working. No matter the devastation wrought upon their cities, humanity fought back with a kind of ferocity the Vor had never expected. They were relentless in their guerrilla warfare, their use of human ingenuity in combat proving to be as dangerous as the Warborn themselves. The Vor quickly found that their superior technology was no match for the unpredictability of the human spirit. What they didn't know, though, was that the Warborn were only getting started. Voss stood on the bridge of the Indomitus, the massive warship that had been retrofitted for the Warborn's unique needs. His dark eyes were fixed on the monitors, tracking the movements of the Vor fleet. The news was not good. They're regrouping, Voss muttered, rubbing his chin. The Vor are consolidating their forces on Titan and Cethrian Prime. If we don't hit them hard now, they'll re-establish control and push us back. Colonel Sarah Holt, who stood beside him, nodded, her expression grim. We can't afford another protracted engagement, sir. The Warborn are our only advantage, but even they need to rest. They're beginning to show signs of fatigue, and it's only a matter of time before the Vor find a way to exploit that. Voss turned to her, his gaze steady but tinged with a frustration he couldn't fully suppress. He knew Holt was right. The Warborn had been engineered to fight tirelessly, but even they couldn't maintain an unyielding offensive forever. The Vor were starting to adapt to their tactics, and worse still, they had reinforcements. We don't have time to wait for another opportunity, Voss said, his voice firm. We hit them hard now. We force them into a corner. If they think we're vulnerable, they'll make the mistake of underestimating us. We'll take out their leadership first. He turned his attention to the Warborn commanders who were now standing at attention, awaiting orders. The moment was coming. They could feel it in the air. This was no longer just a war of attrition. It was a war for survival. Cara Talon, ever steadfast, stood at the front of the line. Her face was a mask of determination, though beneath it, her mind whirled with doubt. Commander Talon, Voss said, his voice unwavering despite the weight of the situation. We need a diversion. Your team will infiltrate a Vor supply base on the outskirts of New Berlin. If we cut off their resources, they'll be forced to fall back and regroup. You'll need to move fast. No one can know you're there until it's too late. Cara nodded, a spark of excitement flickering in her eyes. This was the kind of battle she was built for. a mission that would test the very core of her skills. But even as she turned to leave, a dark thought settled in her chest. The Vor are getting smarter. No longer was this a simple fight for survival. It was a game of wits, a chess match, where every move could be the last. And as Kara's team prepared to drop into the heart of enemy territory, she couldn't shake the feeling that the Vor had already anticipated their next move. As night fell, the Warborn descended, swift and silent. They cut through the wreckage of the city, their cloaking systems making them nearly invisible to the enemy sensors. Their target was a supply depot that had been heavily fortified by the Vor, an important logistics hub that controlled the distribution of vital resources. The Warborn infiltrators moved with practiced precision, each step calculated, each strike exacting. It was then, in the heart of the enemy's stronghold, that Kara's worst fears were realized. An ambush. Explosions rang out, the earth shaking beneath their boots as traps hidden within the depot triggered. Vor soldiers flooded the area, and suddenly, the Warborn found themselves outnumbered. Kara's mind raced. They couldn't fight their way out of this. They had to get out fast. But then she saw it. A small supply tunnel, barely wide enough to fit a man. It was a risk, but it was their only chance. "Move," she shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos as she led her squad toward the tunnel. But even as they fled, Kara knew this battle wasn't over. It had just begun. The Warborn's retreat through the underground tunnel was swift but harried. The Vor soldiers had cornered them, forcing Kara and her team to fight tooth and nail for every step they took. Explosions echoed in the distance, and the air was thick with the smell of smoke and burning metal. The mission had turned from a surgical strike to a desperate escape. And yet, even in the midst of the chaos, Kara's mind remained clear. Survive. Adapt. Fight back. As they reached the end of the tunnel, Kara looked over her shoulder to see the last of her team pouring into the narrow escape hatch. Her heart pounded in her chest. She hadn't felt the fear of failure in a long time, but now it was impossible to shake. The Vor had anticipated their move, and it was only a matter of time before the human resistance was swarmed by the enemy's overwhelming numbers. "We're not done yet," Kara muttered under her breath as she pushed the hatch open. Her eyes scanned the horizon as the team emerged into the open. They had come for an assassination, but now they were fighting for their survival. And if they had to fight their way out of this, they would. Back in orbit, the Warborn fleet was already preparing for the next phase of their campaign. Kara's mission had been a failure in its original objective, but it had accomplished something crucial. The Vor were now on the defensive. They had underestimated humanity's capacity for resilience, and now they were trapped in a bitter war of attrition. Admiral Voss had been waiting for an opening, a chance to strike at the Vor's weak points. Mars, a key strategic asset for both sides, had become the new focus. If Earth was the heart of humanity's resistance, Mars was its lungs, its industrial backbone, and its access point to the stars. Without Mars, Earth would have no hope of holding out. Voss stood at the helm of the Indomitus, his hands resting firmly on the controls. The colossal warship glided silently through the asteroid belt toward its destination. Behind him, the Warborn elite had gathered. They were not mere soldiers. They were the tip of humanity's spear, and each one of them carried the weight of their people's survival. Kara Talon was among them, her eyes narrowed in concentration. "Mars is the key," Voss said, his voice cutting through the tension in the room. "If we lose it, the Vor will be able to cut us off from the rest of the galaxy. We'll be cornered. There won't be any room for resistance. We'll be forced into a drawn-out fight for every inch of Earth's surface." He turned to Kara. "I need you and your squad to lead the charge. We're going to take Mars back, and we're going to do it fast." Kara nodded. She had learned long ago that Voss's orders were not suggestions. They were commands, and following them was a matter of life and death. She had no intention of failing. Not this time. The Warborn fleet arrived in Mars orbit, the planet's red surface bathed in the eerie light of distant stars. The Vor had established a strong foothold on the planet, but Kara and her squad knew that the Vor could be defeated. They had done it before. The key was precision. They couldn't afford to waste time fighting the enemy in pitched battles. They needed to hit hard and fast, taking out the Vor's supply lines, their reinforcements, their command infrastructure, all in a matter of days. "We'll strike at the heart of their operations first," Kara said, as she and her team prepared to descend onto the planet's surface. The strategy was simple, too simple, perhaps, but it was their best chance of regaining the upper hand. "Once we break their supply chains, we'll take control of the outer settlements. We'll force them to retreat." The team suited up, the familiar hiss of their combat armor sealing tightly around them. Kara felt the weight of her rifle settle into her hands, the cold metal a comforting reminder of what she was about to do. Mars's surface was a harsh and unforgiving landscape. Dusty red plains stretched endlessly before them, with the occasional outpost or bunker dotting the horizon. The Vor had made the planet their base of operations, fortifying the most critical locations with impressive precision. But humanity, and especially the Warborn, were no strangers to overcoming impossible odds. The mission began with a brutal assault on a Vor supply base near the northern ice plains. Kara's team descended from the dropship with lethal precision. The plan was to neutralize the Vor's logistical capabilities in the region, cutting off the flow of ammunition, reinforcements, and vital supplies. The Warborn moved as one, a seamless blend of human intelligence and machine-like efficiency. They attacked without warning, catching the Vor soldiers off guard. Kara's squad moved like shadows, slipping through the enemy's defenses and systematically taking out their command structure. She couldn't help but feel a sense of grim satisfaction as the Vor forces struggled to react. The Warborn were not simply soldiers. They were a storm, and no one had ever been prepared for it. As they reached the heart of the base, Kara paused for a moment, surveying the battlefield. Her team had taken the objective, and the Vor forces were in full retreat. The mission had been a success, but she knew this was only the beginning. The Vor would adapt, and they would fight back with everything they had. But the Warborn had already proven something the Vor had failed to understand. Humanity was not weak. Humanity was not prey. Humanity was the predator. The success of the mission on Mars was a fleeting victory, one that tasted bittersweet in the wake of the mounting pressure that surrounded the Warborn. With Vor forces retreating in disarray from their supply bases, the Warborn had gained the upper hand, but the enemy was regrouping. General Rylax, ruthless and calculating, had begun consolidating his forces in deep space. The Vor were not a species to back down so easily, and it was clear the Warborn had only disrupted the enemy's plans, not shattered them. Back on Earth, Admiral Voss was beginning to prepare for humanity's next major strike. The Vor had grown more desperate, and their centralized command was still intact, hidden somewhere within the dark corners of Vor space. If they were to crush this threat once and for all, they would need to strike at the heart of the Vor war machine. That heart was the Titan Forge, the Vor's most crucial facility, where their warships, weapons, and genetic augmentations were crafted. Destroying the Forge could cripple the Vor for good, but the mission was dangerous. It would require every ounce of courage the Warborn had left. Kara Talon stood before a holographic map, her hands clasped behind her back as she studied the coordinates of the Titan Forge. Her mind raced with the possibilities. The Forge was located in a distant, heavily guarded sector, far from Earth or Mars, in a system the Vor had fortified with relentless precision. To infiltrate the area undetected, they would have to travel through a web of sensor-blocking fields, black holes, and asteroid belts. But if they were successful, the Vor's production capacity would be decimated, their military forces would be gutted, and their empire would be crippled. "We don't have much time," Voss said, breaking the silence in the briefing room. "The Vor are already regrouping their fleets. We've intercepted messages indicating they're preparing to launch a full-scale retaliation, including another planetary bombardment on Earth. The forge must be destroyed before they can complete their reinforcements. You and your team will infiltrate their defenses, and will hit them where it hurts." Kara's jaw clenched. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about vengeance. The Vor had taken everything from her family, her friends, her home. And now they were going to feel the weight of human fury. No stone would be left unturned. She glanced over at Colonel Holt, who had already begun assessing the plan's risks and benefits. "If we're going to do this, we'll need more than just force," Holt said quietly, her voice tinged with concern. "We'll need precision. We can't afford another ambush like last time. The Vor are learning fast. We'll be up against their finest, elite guards, automated turrets, possibly even genetically enhanced soldiers. Then we make them regret underestimating us," Kara replied firmly. "We'll hit them so hard they won't know what hit them." The plan was set in motion. The Warborn fleet, led by the Indomitus, would create a diversion, an assault on a nearby Vor stronghold to draw attention away from the Titan Forge's location. Meanwhile, Kara's team would slip through the enemy's defenses, using their advanced stealth technology to avoid detection long enough to reach their target. Once inside the forge, they would disable the facility's core power grid and plant explosives to ensure total destruction. But the enemy knew they were coming. The Vor had already deployed traps, neural disruptors, gravity wells, and sentient automated defenses designed to counter any attempts at sabotage. Kara and her squad, clad in their combat armor, boarded their infiltration craft with heavy hearts but unwavering resolve. As the ship's engines roared to life, Kara took one last look at the crew around her. These were her people, her family, forged in the fires of war. And they would stand together, no matter the cost. As they neared the forge's outer perimeter, the enormity of the mission hit her. The forge wasn't just a facility. It was a symbol of everything the Vor had built, everything they had hoped to use to dominate the galaxy. Its destruction would send a message. Humanity was no longer the prey. "We land in 10, Kara said, her voice steady but laced with the intensity of 1,000 unspoken thoughts. She knew the odds were slim, but failure wasn't an option. If she fell, she would fight until her last breath. But her mind was clear. This time, the Warborn wouldn't leave a single stone unturned. The drop was chaotic. Explosions from the diversionary attack rumbled through the atmosphere as they descended into the heart of the Vor stronghold. The ship's hull shuddered as they broke through the forge's outer defenses. Kara could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins. It was now or never. The ship landed with a resounding thud, and the team spilled out into the shadows. Their target was the core reactor deep inside the forge, a massive, intricately designed structure that powered the entire facility. Every moment counted. The alarms were already blaring, and Kara could hear the telltale sound of Vor forces converging on their position. "We move fast. We hit hard," Kara barked to her squad. "Once we plant the explosives, we get out. No exceptions." They moved through the facility with deadly efficiency, each Warborn soldier working as part of a single, perfectly coordinated unit. Kara led them through the maze of corridors, dispatching Vor guards without hesitation. The facility was vast, its towering walls lined with advanced weaponry and experimental technology. But none of it mattered. The only thing that mattered now was reaching the core reactor. When they finally arrived at the heart of the forge, Kara felt a surge of satisfaction. The reactor loomed before them, a massive, pulsating heart that powered the Vor's war machine. It was time to make them pay for everything they had done. As Kara placed the final charges, the hum of the reactor filled the room. It was the sound of inevitability. She turned to her team. "Get ready to move," she said. "We don't have much time." The countdown began. The countdown echoed in Kara's mind like a ticking clock, relentless and unforgiving. The charges had been set, the reactor's core primed for destruction, but there was no room for error. Not here, not now. The Vor were closing in, and every passing second brought them one step closer to discovering the Warborn's presence. Kara's instincts flared as she adjusted the final detonator, her fingers trembling slightly despite her training. It wasn't fear that shook her. No, it was the knowledge that this was their last chance to cripple the Vor for good. "Charges are in place," Kara said, her voice cool but strained, addressing her team. "Get to the extraction point. Move fast, move quiet. We can't afford any delays." Her team nodded, their faces determined but stoic beneath their helmets. They were machines in that moment, silent, lethal, unstoppable. The mission was close to its end, and with the reactor's imminent destruction, the Vor's iron grip on their war efforts would soon collapse. They could feel the weight of this victory in their bones, and yet the reality of what came next weighed even heavier. They needed to escape, and the Vor would be hunting them the moment the reactor exploded. Kara motioned for her squad to fall in line, and they moved as one. Each step was calculated, every corner surveyed for potential traps. As they navigated through the labyrinthine corridors of the forge, Kara couldn't shake the nagging feeling that they were being watched. The air felt thick with anticipation, and she knew the Vor had to be closing in on them. But they couldn't stop now. A loud metallic clang sounded ahead, followed by the unmistakable hiss of an energy barrier coming to life. Kara's eyes narrowed. There it was. The Vor had anticipated their infiltration and were setting up a trap. She had expected this, but now it was no longer about stealth. It was about survival. "Ambush," Kara shouted, drawing her rifle. "Cover the rear. Engage on my mark." In a heartbeat, the Warborn soldiers split into action. They dropped into position, taking cover behind metal crates and thick pillars. The Vor had deployed an elite task force, their silhouettes sharp against the harsh red lights of the forge. Kara's mind raced, calculating their moves. These were not the average soldiers they had encountered so far. These were the Vor's finest, enhanced by genetic modifications and equipped with advanced weaponry. They would not go down easily. The first volley of fire came from the Vor's automated turrets, cutting through the air with deadly precision. Kara's squad dove into action, their trained reflexes kicking in. The Warborn were not just human. They were superior, faster, and more deadly than any normal soldier. They adapted and reacted with a terrifying efficiency that left the Vor scrambling. Kara's rifle roared to life, the recoil familiar and comforting in her hands. Each shot found its mark, taking down one Vor soldier after another. The others of her team followed suit, their weapons a blur of motion as they fought back with unmatched fury. The Vor were strong, but the Warborn were stronger. They had been forged for this moment, this war, and they would not be denied. But even as they pushed forward, Kara could hear the low hum of another, more dangerous sound, the sound of a Vor-heavy warship descending into the forge's atmosphere. The massive ship was likely deploying reinforcements, and they were already closing in on the Warborn's position. They couldn't afford to waste time. Kara glanced at her HUD. The timer on the explosives was nearing its final seconds. "Move, move, move," she shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. "We don't have long." The Warborn soldiers broke into a sprint, weaving between fallen Vor soldiers and automated drones. The extraction point was just ahead, but every corner, every door, felt like it was about to close in on them. The Vor were relentless. Kara could feel their pursuit like a tangible thing, an icy presence in her back. Every moment counted now. With a final surge, the Warborn burst through a large access door, flooding into the open. They could see the sky above, the atmosphere outside lit with the glow of distant explosions, and the streaks of laser fire from the battle raging overhead. But there was no time to admire the view. They were close, so close to escaping, but the Vor were right behind them. "Get to the shuttle," Kara ordered, her voice a growl as she sprinted for the landing zone. The shuttle was waiting just ahead, its engines already roaring to life. But the Vor weren't giving up. Heavy artillery blasts streaked from the distant warship, their deadly arcs crashing into the ground around them. Kara dove into the shuttle's hatch, the rest of the team following her in quick succession. The ship's hatch slammed shut just as a powerful blast rocked the ground beneath them. The shuttle's engines roared to life, lifting off into the air, barely escaping the bombardment. Kara looked out the rear viewport to see the forge's central core erupting in a brilliant explosion, a burst of fiery energy that shook the very atmosphere. The forge was gone, its heart destroyed. But as the shuttle veered away from the fiery chaos, Kara knew this was far from over. The Vor would come for them, would retaliate with all the fury they had left. And the Warborn, though victorious today, were not safe yet. There were still battles to be fought. And there would be no rest until the Vor were broken, until humanity stood free once again. As the shuttle soared toward the safety of orbit, Kara's mind hardened like steel. We've taken one step closer to winning. But the war is far from over. And I will see it through, no matter the cost. The shuttle broke through the clouds, its engines humming with power as it ascended into the vast, dark expanse of space. Kara Talon's eyes never left the viewport, her gaze locked on the burning horizon of Mars, now a distant memory of war. The destruction of the Titan Forge had been a victory, but it had come at a high cost. The Vor were not a species to retreat quietly. Even now, Kara could feel the weight of the war pressing in on her. Darker days were still ahead. As the shuttle accelerated toward the Indomitus, the massive Warborn flagship waiting in orbit, the comms buzzed to life with a new transmission. Kara's grip tightened on her rifle, and she answered with a curt nod. "Commander Talon, you are clear to dock," came Voss's voice. "We've received word that the Vor are massing their fleets. They know what we've done, and they will retaliate with everything they have. This isn't over." Kara exhaled sharply, her jaw set. She knew that the Vor would be coming for them soon, but she had no time for fear or hesitation. Humanity had lived on the brink of extinction for too long. Now it was time to put everything they had into this final push. As the shuttle docked with the Indomitus, Kara and her squad disembarked into the warship's hangar, their boots echoing off the cold metal floor. The ship's interior was a flurry of activity. Engineers, techs, and soldiers rushed to prepare for the next battle. But despite the chaos, there was a shared sense of determination in the air. The Warborn were ready. Kara made her way to the bridge, where Admiral Voss was already awaiting her arrival. He stood at the helm, his gaze sharp and unyielding as he watched the live feed from Mars. The Vor fleet had begun to mobilize, their massive warships flaring to life, their engines pushing them toward Earth. "They're coming," Voss said, his voice grave. "It's a full assault. If we don't hit them first, Earth will fall. You and your squad have made an impact, but we need a decisive blow. It's time to take the fight to them." Kara nodded, her resolve solidifying. "I'm ready," she said, her voice cold as ice. "Where do we strike?" Voss turned to the tactical board, which flickered to life, displaying a map of the Vor's incoming fleet. Their ships were vast, fortresses in space, but the Indomitus was no less formidable. The warship had been designed for this moment, its weapon systems and tactical sensors unmatched by any fleet the Vor had ever encountered. The Warborn had the firepower, but it would take more than just brute strength to win this final war. They needed strategy. "Here," Voss said, pointing to a sector near Earth's moon, where a massive Vor command ship, the Desolation, was leading the charge. The Vor had positioned their strongest forces just outside Earth's gravitational pull, where they believed they could blockade and destroy the Warborn's last bastion of resistance. "We hit their flagship first, take out their leadership. The rest will crumble after that." Kara studied the map, noting the layout of the Vor fleet. It was heavily fortified, but with careful planning, they could breach it. The Indomitus was fast and agile, and Kara's squad was more than capable of infiltrating the enemy's defenses. They would need to break through a minefield of enemy ships, taking down any escorts along the way. Then, with everything they had, they would assault the Desolation, the heart of the Vor command. "Understood," Kara said, her voice filled with certainty. "We'll take the fight to them. This ends today." Admiral Voss gave her a nod, his eyes filled with a quiet respect. He knew how high the stakes were. For all their strength, the Warborn were still only a fraction of the Vor's might. This battle would decide the fate of humanity, and there would be no second chances. Kara turned to her squad, who had gathered at the far end of the bridge. Colonel Holt was the first to speak, her expression tight with anticipation. "Commander, we've got the tactical advantage," Holt said, her voice steady. "But the Vor will be waiting for us. We'll be outnumbered, and their flagship is heavily fortified. We'll need to hit fast and hard. No hesitation." Kara gave her a sharp nod, her mind already racing through the tactical options. They couldn't afford a prolonged engagement. This had to be a decisive strike. Every moment of hesitation could cost them everything. "We'll take a multi-pronged approach," Kara said, her voice cold as she laid out the plan. "My team will infiltrate the flagship's lower levels while we engage their outer defenses. We disable their weapons, sabotage their communications, and ensure their leadership can't escape. Voss, we'll need full support from the fleet. I'll give the order to attack once we're in position." Voss's eyes met hers, filled with unspoken trust. "You have the command, Commander. This is it. Good luck." The tension in the air was palpable as Kara and her team boarded the Indomitus' dropship. The final assault was about to begin. As the ship rocketed toward the enemy fleet, Kara felt the weight of everything on her shoulders. The lives of her comrades, the fate of Earth, the legacy of the Warborn. This was their moment. There would be no retreat, only victory or death. The dropship rumbled beneath Kara's feet as it descended toward the heart of the Vor fleet. She gripped the edge of her seat, her fingers tight with anticipation. The massive bulk of the desolation, the Vor's flagship, loomed ahead, its dark silhouette almost impossibly large against the backdrop of distant stars. The ship's hull was a patchwork of reinforced alloys and thick shields, a monument to the Vor's obsession with destruction. Kara knew that the battle ahead would test every ounce of her will. The countdown to engagement echoed in her ear, the seconds ticking down like a metronome, marking the inevitable. The Warborn fleet, led by the Indomitus, had already begun its assault, distracting the Vor's outer defenses, but Kara's squad was the spearhead. They would infiltrate the heart of the enemy ship, cripple its power core, and eliminate its command structure. This was not just a mission. It was humanity's last hope. 5 minutes to landing zone. The pilot's voice crackled over the comms. Kara's squad readied their weapons, the soft hiss of their armor sealing echoing in the cabin. They were a single unit now, no longer individuals but an extension of the same purpose. She looked around at her team, each face grim but resolute. They had survived worse, faced death countless times, but today the stakes were higher than ever before. "We've trained for this," Kara said, her voice steady, though inside, her heart raced. "Stay focused. Disable the flagship's shields first, then we hit their command center. It's a one-way trip, but we're going to make it count." "Understood," Colonel Holt replied, her voice calm despite the fury they were about to unleash. Holt was the steady hand of the team, the one who kept them grounded when the battle raged. She was more than just a soldier. She was a sister in arms. "We'll take out anything in our path." The dropship jolted as it broke through the outer layers of the Vor defense perimeter. The sharp crackle of enemy fire danced across the hull as their ship was buffeted by blasts. But the crew wasn't fazed. The ship's shielding absorbed the hits, and the warship was too fast to be caught for long. "Prepare for landing," the pilot announced. The dropship hurtled toward the Desolation's landing bay, the enormous vessel's bay doors slowly opening to receive them. Kara could see the docking bay swarming with Vor soldiers, their dark figures standing at attention, waiting for the inevitable fight. She could almost feel their eyes on her, the weight of their presence filling the air with tension. But this time, the Warborn were the hunters. The Vor would learn to fear them. The ship hit the ground with a violent thud, and the doors blasted open. Kara's team poured out in a surge of motion, weapons at the ready, as the first wave of Vor soldiers rushed toward them. "Fire!" Kara barked. The Warborn opened fire, their rifles disintegrating the first few enemies in an instant. The Vor were relentless, but their efforts were futile. The Warborn soldiers were a different breed, faster, more precise, and far better trained. They cut through the Vor with ruthless efficiency, leaving nothing but a bloody path in their wake. But as they pushed forward, Kara's senses remained on high alert. The Vor would not go down without a fight, and every step they took inside the flagship brought them closer to the heart of the enemy's command. A blinding flash lit up the corridor as an explosion ripped through the metal wall next to them. Kara ducked, rolling behind cover as the sound of enemy fire escalated. Her squad was quick to respond, unloading into the ranks of incoming Vor soldiers, but Kara's mind raced. "They know we're here," she muttered to herself. "They're trying to lock us down." "Stay mobile," Holt shouted. "Push through to the power core. We can't let them set up a perimeter." The battle raged around them as the Warborn pressed forward, neutralizing pockets of resistance with methodical precision. Kara's heart pounded as they advanced deeper into the heart of the desolation, the ship's vast corridors stretching out like a labyrinth. The Vor had built this place for one purpose: domination. But they hadn't expected humanity to fight back like this. They reached the first set of blast doors, which had already begun to seal in an effort to contain them. Kara stepped forward, planting an explosive charge on the door's control panel. "Charge set," she said, stepping back. "Get ready." The explosion rocked the hall, tearing through the reinforced door and sending sparks flying. The team moved in swiftly, their weapons raised and ready. Inside, they encountered the first true challenge: a unit of Vor shock troopers, augmented with cybernetic enhancements, their red eyes glowing with malevolent intensity. Kara's squad didn't hesitate. They struck first, a volley of fire ripping through the air. The shock troopers retaliated with powerful energy blasts, but the Warborn were faster. Kara dived into a roll, her rifle finding the weak point in one trooper's armor, sending him crumpling to the ground. Her team followed suit, cutting down the rest with brutal efficiency. With the shock troopers eliminated, they advanced deeper into the command deck. The Vor had anticipated this attack, but their strategy was crumbling. The Warborn were too much, too fast, too strong. They reached the central command room, a massive chamber filled with glowing consoles and battle-ready Vor commanders. At the far end of the room, an enormous holographic map of the galaxy flickered ominously. Kara's eyes locked on the Vor leader standing at the center of it all, General Rylax, the one who had orchestrated the destruction of Earth. "This ends now," Kara muttered under her breath as her squad closed in. The chamber was eerily quiet, the soft hum of the Vor technology filling the air as Kara Talon and her squad had advanced toward General Rylax. The Vor commander stood at the far end of the room, his figure framed by the holographic map that displayed the entire galaxy, with Earth's orbit marked in red. He wasn't surprised by their arrival. Instead, his icy eyes locked onto Kara with cold recognition. He knew who they were. He knew what they were capable of. "You are brave," General Rylax's voice boomed, distorted by the echo of the vast room. "But foolish. You think you can end the Vor with a handful of soldiers and a few bombs." Kara stepped forward, her eyes unwavering. "We've already done more than you ever thought possible, and we're just getting started." Rylax didn't flinch. His hand hovered over the control panel beside him, ready to activate whatever defenses the Vor had left. But Kara knew the truth. His options were running out. The Vor were already on the back foot. The Indomitus was pushing through their defenses, the Warborn fleet in full assault mode, and the destruction of the Titan Forge had dealt a blow from which they might never recover. Now it was time to deal with Rylax. Finally, once and for all. "Do you really think your resistance will matter?" Rylax asked, his voice mocking. "The Vor Empire spans beyond the limits of your tiny understanding. You are but a fleeting flicker in the grand history of the galaxy. You're wrong, Kara said, her voice low and resolute. The galaxy is changing. The Vor may have been the predators for eons, but the tables have turned. We're not afraid of you anymore. Rylax's lips curled into a cruel smile. You speak as if you understand power, Commander, but you're just a child playing with fire. He snapped his fingers, and instantly, the walls around them began to shift, massive panels retracting to reveal a new enemy, a squadron of Vor's most deadly warriors, genetically enhanced and equipped with the finest weapons. The air crackled with energy as Rylax stepped back, his hand raised in silent command. Kill them. The enhanced Vor surged forward, faster than anything Kara had faced before. Their movements were calculated, precise, and brutal, but they hadn't factored in one thing: the Warborn. The squad split in an instant, moving like clockwork, adapting to every new threat. Kara didn't hesitate. She fired a precise shot that struck one of the enhanced warriors in the chest, sending him to the ground in a heap. Holt and the rest of the team followed suit, cutting down the rest with lethal efficiency. But Rylax wasn't finished. He pressed a button on his wristpad, and the room shuddered. The walls began to close in, sealing off their escape. The Vor commander's voice echoed through the chamber. I'll let you watch your destruction. The Vor are beyond your reach now. You'll die here, and I will take pleasure in your failure. Kara's heart pounded as the walls inched closer, but there was no fear, only resolve. She knew what had to be done. This fight wasn't just about survival. It was about the future of humanity. Earth. The Warborn had given everything to see this through. We're not done yet, Kara muttered. With one swift motion, she grabbed a plasma grenade from her belt, activating it as she hurled it toward Rylax. It exploded just short of the command platform, sending a blast of fiery energy toward the Vor leader. Rylax's armor absorbed the hit, but the force of the explosion threw him back, off his feet. His expression darkened, fury written across his face. You think you can defeat me with cheap tricks? He roared, rising to his feet. His hand flicked a switch, and the ship's alarms began blaring. The countdown to the reactor's core meltdown had begun. Kara didn't waste a moment. Now's our chance, she shouted to her team. We end this. Rylax staggered as the Warborn team closed in, a chorus of gunfire filling the room. Kara's heart raced as she charged, closing the distance with lightning speed. She could see it, the crack in Rylax's once imposing facade. He wasn't invincible. The Vor might have ruled the galaxy for centuries, but the Warborn were different. They weren't just soldiers. They were the future. Kara dove into a roll, avoiding the flurry of energy blasts coming from the commander's side as she aimed for the weak spot in Rylax's armor. With one final, precise shot, she struck, her bullet penetrating the critical joint in his defense. The commander let out a guttural scream as he collapsed to the ground, his once proud figure now a crumpled heap on the cold metal floor. As the Vor leader fell, the countdown continued. Time's up, Kara said quietly. With the core now destabilizing, the Warborn squad retreated toward the exit, moving as one to the escape routes. The Vor flagship's final moments were at hand. The explosive force from the core would take everything with it. The desolation, Rylax, and the remnants of the Vor fleet. Kara could feel the power of the explosion building, ready to tear the ship apart. The squad boarded their extraction ship as explosions shook the ship's foundations. The massive structure of the desolation began to crumble under the pressure, its engines flickering as the reactor core went critical. Kara's heart thudded in her chest as they rocketed into space, just as the Vor flagship erupted in a blinding burst of light. The shockwave rattled their ship, but they held steady, watching from the viewport as the destruction unfolded. The Vor had fallen. The Warborn had won. And in the aftermath, as the remnants of the Vor fleet scattered, the Warborn looked ahead to a new horizon, a future where humanity could finally breathe, free from the shadow of the Vor. The galaxy would never be the same again, and the Warborn had written their place in history. Cara Talon's eyes darkened with determination. This was only the beginning.